Big Data AI seminar. My name is Irene Wysek, and I'm a professor of accounting and director of the Big Data AI Hub here at our Institute for Management and Innovation at the University of Toronto. Our goal at the IMI Big Data AI Hub is to engage interested stakeholders in discussions around increasing use of big data, AI, and other emerging technologies. So we are totally excited to have you here with us today. Special thanks to Professor Michael Marin for lining up our speakers, and we have a great speaker today. So for today's seminar, we'll be talking about a more traditional, large, readily available, rich database that is created by the Canadian government through the census. In this case, the 2021 census. One of the things we'll be highlighting today is housing, something that is top of mind in Canada, given the significant rise in housing costs and the affordability question. Before we begin, just a small note that the session will be taped and we're already recording. And a reminder that previous recordings are on our website, and we'll put the website link in the chat. There's some excellent content there that you may wish to check out from past sessions. If you have questions, please raise your hand or feel free to put them in the chat. We'll do our best to get to them throughout or at the end. And now I'm very pleased to introduce you to today's presenter, Paul Laffin, Data Ambassador at Statistics Canada. I love that title, Paul. Please join me in welcoming Paul. Paul, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to make sure I could share the screen here. All right, I got a perfect. Thank you so much. I could see that. And I'm just going to do one more thing and then we could start. There we go. So thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you today. So yeah, we're going to talk about the Census of Population, but we're going to do a specific focus on housing. StatCan does a census and is one of the richest sources of data for all parts of society, but specifically housing. I think you'll find it particularly useful as a source. Before I begin every presentation, I don't usually include hearts, but today I did, but I always include a thank you. So thank you so much for your time and bearing with me today. But thank you also for participating in the census. And I know that most of you probably did because we got a response rate of over 98%. And that's a mandatory survey, so you were required to do that. So, but still, thank you. But we've also have, hundreds of other surveys that you may have had that are many of them are voluntary. That perhaps you had the opportunity to participate in those. So, thank you so much. That's really important to not just government but all data users across the country. So thank you, and thank you for putting your faith in our data. And using our data, and I hope that today's session will really give you the opportunity to see what what more might be possible with the data. Another thing that I always like to talk about before I begin the meat of the presentation is talking about our StatCan Trust Center. So your personal information has always and will always be protected. So this is not just a commitment, it's actually built into our work and our culture. So none of your private information can be released under any law to anyone. So I would urge you to visit our Trust Center. There's a link on the slide. So I'm going to make these slides available later on today so that you can have these, and there's a lot of great resources, and this Trust Center is definitely one of them. So you could see how we protect the data, how we make sure that people can't reverse engineer the data, if you will, to be able to identify individuals or organizations. So a little bit about what we are going to look at today in the next hour or so. We are going to look at as mentioned, the census population. But before we get into the thick of things, we're going to look at some of the concepts and definitions. Specifically, we're going to spend a bit of time on the housing concepts and definitions. We're going to find some of the findings or results from the census. And then we're also going to look at other data sources within StatCan for, and with a couple exceptions, with even outside of StatCan for housing related data. We'll do a Q&A, and then I will bring you on a web tour to help you find these data. So let's start with the 2021 census. And this image is, I use it on purpose because data are often, many of this group, I'm sure that data are often used for storytelling, and census is no exception. The 2021 census data could be the ultimate tool to get insights necessary to tell the story of Canada and what it looked like in 2021. So census happened in the reference date of May of 2021, but we began to tell our story in February of 2022. That's when we started releasing data. We started releasing just the basic data. So you could see on February 9th of 2022, population and dwelling counts, all the way to the end of 2022 and on November 30th, where we released the last major batch, which was education, labor, language at work, commuting, and instruction in the official minority. There are still releases still happening. The what you find now is mostly our own internal analysts within StatCan will take a look at the data and provide some of their insights and their stories. So that's the bulk of what you're seeing today and going forward with regards to data from the 2021 census. So the census is but one of 453 statistical programs. We have surveys and other administrative data sources, but it's one of 453. But what it does is it helps us in all of our social and household surveys, since it's used to determine things like sample design for all of our other household surveys. So Teresa Scass, our former chairperson of the Canadian Statistics Advisory Council, I think she really says it well when she said, quality data informs good decision making and helps us better understand our country and the challenges we face. The census is the backbone of our national data collection exercise that offers all Canadians a chance to count and be counted. So let's see what that looked like. So before I get into the housing data, I just want to spend a bit of time going into some detail about who is counted in the census, or the target population, as you'll see it in a lot of our survey pages. You're going to see a target population, and for the census, these are Canadian citizens by birth or by naturalization, landed immigrants, and since 1991, non-permanent residents, and we'll get into what those are in the coming slides. Also counted are people, Canadian citizens and landed immigrants who do live outside of the country, but not all, but the people that we count outside of the country are people like government employees working outside of Canada, embassy staff posted to other countries, members of the Canadian Armed Forces stationed outside of Canada, and Canadian crew members of merchant vessels, as well as their families that may be with them. The non-permanent residents who are included in the target population of the census are refugee claimants and their families living within Canada, and permit holders, whether that be work or study permits, and members of their families who are living with them in Canada. So of course, there are foreign residents who are excluded from the census, and those are government representatives from another country and their family members. So think about people working for a foreign embassy here in Canada. Members of the armed forces of other countries who may be stationed at bases here in Canada, and residents of another country or just visiting Canada temporarily, things like vacation or here for a conference, etc. So this is on this slide here, you'll see some of the topics of the census questionnaire. They range in just basic stuff like address, names, date of birth, all the way to, of course, things like housing, religion, mobility, education, etc. The items highlighted in blue are items that are new for 2021 census. We're not going to have a lot of time to go into those much today, but I will provide you with some resources later that you could really get some more detail on these items. But keep in mind that there are a few questions on the census. There are a few questions, sorry, so very few questions on the census about income. But we definitely do have a lot of income data in the census results. We get that from the Canada Revenue Agency, and then we get the data from the CRA and we link it to the census results. In other words, we do publish income data, we just don't need to ask about it on the form. Since you already provided it to the CRA via, for example, your T1 tax form, as well as other tax forms. So even if you didn't complete your taxes, we do have access to things like T4s. So there are other cases where we'll use data from administrative sources, and another example would be immigration data from IRCC, or Immigration and Refugee and Citizenship Canada. So to jump into some of the results, but just to show you an example of what might be possible with census. So new for census 2021, we took a closer look at population trends associated with downtowns of Canada's largest urban centers. So you could see on this map here, downtown Toronto in dark gray, and 4 different zones according to their proximity to the downtown. Also shown on the map are the population growth of these areas between 2016 and 2021. And for most of the downtowns of the 41 large urban centers, population growth has accelerated over the last 5 years compared to the previous 5-year period. So aside from the static maps and tables, we also have a tool such as the Census Program Data Viewer, which allows you to select your own geography and then select the specific indicators you're interested in. So seen here is a map of the Ottawa-Gatineau Census Metropolitan Area, showing the areas within that have seen the most growth in population from 2016 to 2021. And you can see here on this slide here that you can zoom right into an individual neighborhood, and for more detailed on. So this is looking at census tracts, and those could be usually we try to aim for a population of around 5,000. There is quite a bit of variance, but normally a census tract we like to have to see a population of around 5,000. If it starts to exceed that, we'll split it and there'll be new census tracts created. But yeah, so this is one of the geographies available. It's not the smallest level of geography that we disseminate. We have a level of geography called the dissemination area, and those can have a population of about 500 people. So really detailed, low levels of geography that you could get census data on. So the best, quickest, and most popular way to access all of this data in a single place is the census profile. And we're going to take a look at this a little bit later on when we do the live demo, but just know that it provides data for all the topics, for those very small geographies like those DAs that I just talked about. There's not, because of the level of detail and the small level of geography, you won't have the cross tabulation like you will in some of our other data tables, but you will have, as you can see here, by gender, you will have be able to cross tabulate the data by gender at least. So let's get back into housing, because that's the main topic of today. So let's take a look at some of the topics. So in order to best understand our data, I think it's really important to understand some of the terminology that we use, as it may differ from what you may be used to. So starting with dwellings, we have dwellings are defined as a set of living quarters, and there's 2 basic types of dwellings in Canada. There's collective dwellings and there's private dwellings. Most of the data that will be published on our website will be for private dwellings. And what those are, they refer to a separate set of living quarters with a private entrance, either from outside the building or from a common hall, lobby, vestibule, or stairway inside the building. The entrance, this is the important part, the entrance to the dwelling must be one that can be used without passing through the living quarters of some other person or group of persons. So the classic example that we always use is if in order to get to your dwelling, or your, say your personal space that you may rent. So if it's a room, for example, you're renting a room, and you have to go through somebody's living room, then that is not a separate dwelling. You are in many cases a boarder, or you're renting a room in that place, but it's part of one single private dwelling, because you have to pass through that living room, someone else's private dwelling, private space. So we don't just report on the number of dwellings, but we also capture things like suitability and conditions of homes. It's therefore necessary to provide you with some definitions on things like dwelling conditions. We have regular maintenance needed. So these are direct questions on the census. So this includes dwellings where only regular maintenance, such as painting or furnace cleaning, is required. Then people may also respond by minor repairs needed, and that includes um, things like loose floor tiles, bricks, or shingles, and then major repairs needed, and those are things where there things like there's defects in plumbing or electrical wiring, or major structural repairs are needed to walls, floors, or ceilings. So we have these categories, and you'll see in some of the results a little bit later on, and some of the other definitions borrow on these indicators. We also ask about period of construction, and this refers to the period in time during which the building or dwelling was originally constructed. There's some other notes on this slide that with regards to um, if there's been remodels or things like that, then it's really has to do with the original construction. Condominium status is also a question on the census, and it should be important to note that a condominium is not a type of physical structure. So it's not like, most of us will use in our everyday language, oh, look at that condo. But really, condominium is it's not a physical structure. So you couldn't tell from the outside whether or not it is a condo unless you have some internal knowledge of that structure. Rather, it's an ownership structure, because it's very difficult to visually look at and different from perhaps an apartment, a straight up purpose built apartment building versus a condominium structure. Um, Rooms and bedrooms. So this is also captured in the census. So rooms refer to enclosed areas with a private dwelling, which are finished and suitable for year-round living. And then there's also a separate category for bedrooms that we do capture again on the census. This one here, the value, this is something that gets often a lot of comments or questions. And it should be noted that this is owner estimated. So it's what the owner expects that this asset, if it were to be sold, what the value of that dwelling would be. So it's not an appraised value, it's just an opinion of the owner. And I'll talk a little bit later on about other data sets that have different methods of valuation of homes. And then now we're not talking about the structure anymore, but rather the composition of the structure. So we're talking about households. So this refers to a person or group of persons who occupy the same dwelling and do not have a usual place of residence elsewhere in Canada or abroad. So a household may be either a collective household, such as a long-term care facility, and other type of institutional dwellings, or it can be a private household where most people reside in Canada are part of a private household, and that refers to a person or group of person who occupy the same dwelling and do not have a usual place or residence elsewhere in Canada. Tenure, we also capture on tenure, and in StatCan, the definition of tenure refers to whether the household is owned or rented. I'm not going to go into the other fine print, but again, this is to be used as a resource for you, this presentation deck after today. The household maintainer, so that's something that often gets used. So I think it's worth spending a minute on here. It refers to whether or not a person residing in the household is responsible for paying the rent or the mortgage or the taxes or the electricity or other services or utilities. And where the situations are, the number of people may contribute to the payment. More than one person in the household may be identified as a household maintainer. Um, then you have people often use in when they're looking at our statistics, they'll use, and we have a term called primary household maintainers. So that's the first person in the household identified as someone who pays the rent or mortgage or the taxes or the other bills for that dwelling. So in the case where there's two or more people listed as a household maintainer, again, it's the first person listed is chosen as the primary household maintainer. And how that often gets used is, say you're trying to identify um, a senior's household. Well, what if you have persons that are not seniors of senior age in that household? So what they'll do is they'll look at the age of the primary household maintainer. You could say the same thing of a language group. So what's a francophone household? So you could say when the primary household maintainer is a francophone. That is just one way of doing it. It's definitely not the only way that you may do such a thing to identify francophone households. You could say that any household that contains a francophone you could say that that's a francophone household. You could use majority. It really is up to you. We provide the data and the building blocks so that you could use what you need to that meets your needs for your project. So shelter cost, we capture this data as well. So this refers to the average monthly total of all shelter expenses paid by a household that owns or rents the dwelling. And for owned households, this may include things like mortgage payments, property taxes, condo fees, also other utility costs such as electricity, heat, water, and other municipal services. For rented households, this would include the rent and the cost of the electricity, heat, and water, and other municipal services that may be paid if they are paid separately. It should be noted that we do not publish tables on specific costs such as electricity, but rather as a total shelter cost due to non-response and imputation rates of individual items within the shelter cost. So, for example, electricity, there's quite a bit of imputation, meaning people may not have the amount that is they may not have filled that part on the form, and so we'll impute it based on a similar household. We'll impute that amount for that household. So we'll borrow from, we call it the nearest neighbor. It's not always physically the nearest neighbor, but it can be someone who has the same household composition, so similar ages, a number of people in a similar type of house. We may impute there. So that's why it's important to look at the total shelter costs rather than an individual item such as electricity or water. And then we have something that's often, often discussed, especially now with the cost of housing. We have something called the shelter cost to income ratio. And again, as it implies, it refers to the proportion of the average total income of households which is spent on the shelter cost. Housing suitability, that is something that we work on with our other federal partners, such as the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation and ESDC. It refers to whether a private household is living in suitable accommodations according to the national occupancy standards. So that is whether the dwelling has enough bedrooms for the size and composition of the household. And housing suitability assesses the required number of bedrooms for a household based on not just the pure numbers, but it also looks at age, gender, and relationship among household members, and whether it would be appropriate, for example, to for those persons to share rooms. Um, the persons per room is another indicator. It refers to an indicator of the level of crowding in a private dwelling, and it's calculated by dividing the number of persons in the household by the number of rooms in the dwelling. So pretty straightforward. Core housing need is another one of these indicators that we work with our partners at Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. It refers to whether a private household's housing falls below at least one of the indicator thresholds for housing adequacy, affordability, or suitability, and would have to spend 30% or more of its total before tax income to pay the median rent of an alternative local housing that is acceptable. It should be noted that only private, non-farm, non-reserve, and owner or rented households with incomes greater than zero and shelter cost income ratios less than 100% are assessed for a core housing need. The other thing that I found interesting is um, that attending school is considered a transitional phase, and therefore, and low income by student households are viewed as a temporary condition. So the households that have at least one maintainer aged 15 to 29 attending school are considered a not not to be considered in core housing needs regardless of their circumstances. Subsidized housing, again, very straightforward, refers to whether a renter household lives in a dwelling that is subsidized. And now that we got uh, most of the definitions and concepts out of the way, let's look at some of the results. So this is taken from the daily release, an article that we published on release day in 2022. We found that 66.5% of Canadian households owned their home in 2011, and this is down 2.5 percentage points from 2011 when home ownership rate was 69%. So that's the chart that you see on the left-hand side of the slide. So starting on the slide in 1971, when home ownership rates was around 60%, and you could see the increase all the way to the current or most recent census. Um, in 2021, there were 10 million households that own their home, and that's more than at any point in our history, up 8.4% since 2011. And during that same period, the number of renter households grew by 21.5% to 5 million renter households in 2021. Another insight that we found was that recently built dwellings are more likely to be rented as a trend of building apartments and condominiums continued. So 40.4% of the housings built in the last 5 years was tenant occupied, and over 1/3 of recently built dwellings constructed from 2011 to 2021 were occupied and primarily maintained by millennials, whether that be renters or owners at 36.6%. And here's a map, and basically what it's showing is the rate of core housing needs by province and territory. So almost 1.5 million Canadian households, or 10.1%, lived in core housing need. And the core housing need rate for homeowners was 5.3%, was about 1/3 of the unaffordable housing rate. And the core housing need rate for renters, 20%, was nearly 2/3 the rate of unaffordable housing at 33.2%. So here's there's a link on this slide as well, which provides some other housing indicators. Some we've seen already, like affordable housing, core housing need, suitable housing, and adequate housing. But you can see here that this tool allows you to find the data based on age group, by gender, by characteristic, by household type, by geography. So the example we're looking at here is for the Toronto CSD, and that stands for Census Subdivision, which is the municipality or the city of Toronto. And you also could break this down by tenure, so owner or rented. So this is a great little tool to get a really quick look at housing data for any city in Canada or any municipality. So before we go into um, the presentation, the demonstration of the website and how to find some of this data, I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about the department that I work in. It's called the Toronto Data Service Center. We provide services to data users actually all around the world. Where I work out of the Toronto office, and we have other offices in Montreal, Ottawa, Halifax, in Vancouver, in Edmonton, and basically the requests get handled. So in Toronto, we handle requests for all of Ontario and as well as the National Capital Region, and also for countries around the world. So we get requests for very simple data requests for that we could find on the website, but sometimes there's more complex requests that require research, customization of data. So the data that we could find on the website, that's a free of charge service. We say, here it is on the website, we help you find it. Sometimes there's custom tables that are created that we do have to charge a fee because we are not given an unlimited budget by the federal government. So we do have to recover our costs for those activities. But yeah, so what I recommend to everyone that attends a session like this is if you ever have trouble finding something, please reach out to us. And you could find our phone number there on a slide. You could see there's an email address as well. There's also on our website, there's at the bottom of every single page, there's a little link that says contact us, and you can reach us. There's an online forum, and this information is on there. So please, unless you're enjoying the journey of exploring our website, please, by all means. But if you really need to find something fast, give us a call. During business hours, someone will actually pick up the call and help you. So please do that. So I just have a couple more before I jump into onto the website. I want to talk about the other housing data sources within Statistics Canada. We have the Canadian Housing Statistics Program. So you notice that does not have survey in the name. So basically, we do not do any additional survey work for that program. What we do is we collect mostly administrative data sources. So we get data from the different provinces and territories, things like assessment value. We get tax data. Um, all of these different housing, we get financial data from banks with regards to mortgages. So we get all, and then we link it with some census data. And so we have this other, that data source, and it gets updated annually. I don't think we have 2022 data yet, but definitely 21. And there's a lot of different interesting data sets in that program. So if you have the chance, please visit that program. We do have a Canadian Housing Survey, which does where we do reach out to Canadian households and get some additional housing information. Of course, we get building permits data from the municipalities across the country. And that's really useful as a quick indicator of housing activity and construction and demolition in municipalities across the country. We also partner with Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation on a lot of different projects, but they also do their own, they do their own surveys, and we publish for example, they have a rentals survey and we publish their data on our website. And so, the last link here is housing statistics. That's a link to a hub on our page where you could find a link to all things housing when it comes to Statistics Canada. So that's it for the formal presentation. I'm gonna switch over to the browser. Just be one moment. And maybe while I do that, let's make sure I don't break it here. If there are any questions, I wouldn't mind taking a few questions now, just while it's still fresh and before we go into to the website. So if there's any questions, I don't see any in the chat, I don't believe.
I have a quick question, maybe Paul, I can
Yes,
start it off. I
yes.
think it's on slide 32, and you don't need to go back there, but you said in 2021, 10 million households own their own home. So what percentage would that be? Like households, I guess, I don't know what average number of people in the household, but what percentage would that be of all
So
households?
that's a pretty good, easy calculation to do. Um, I'm just making a note, and we'll use that as an indicator to find the total number of households in Canada.
Okay, very
And
interesting.
we'll find that ourselves because I don't know
All
the answer
right.
to off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? We don't, as you said, Paul, nothing in the chat.
So Paul, I actually have a question about these
Yes,
about the data requests. So thanks a lot for the
yes.
presentation, very informative. Who's making these requests? Is it academics? Is it think tanks? Is it the private sector? What are you seeing and what are they requesting and how are they utilizing this information? Because I mean, having a 98% response rate is unbelievable, right? We always talk about data accuracy and at least in all the other data sources that I've used, there's nowhere close to a 98% response rate. So I'm curious who's using this and what they're using it for.
Um, so there's two kind of elements there. So first, I could touch upon the response rate. So yeah, 90%. It's about what we had in 2016. I mean, it helps that it's mandated by law that you respond to the census, but we also a big part of, and I tell this anyone doing a survey, a big part of survey work is follow up, right? So following up with non-responders. So we have that's why it takes from May to October to do the census, because we're following up with households who have not responded and helping them out. So that's that's the key to that, is following up with the non-responders. With regards to who are making these custom data requests and these data requests, and I was nodding because it's all of the above that you mentioned. It's everyone from other federal departments, of course, are big data users. Um, Same with provincial ministries, municipalities across the country, but academia, absolutely, nonprofits, absolutely, individual students, yes. So yeah, it's everyone's using it. It's fantastic because the data does serve a prime. Every question on the census is because there's a need for that data. So in many cases, it's other federal departments need that data for a program. So you can imagine like the housing data, right? Because Canada's investing a lot in housing and housing activity, so there's a need for that data. But whenever other people could use the data for, whether it be for academic research or for private investment, it provides additional use of our data. So that's fantastic, because when you have one sole purpose of a question on a census, because one person needs it, it's kind of like, maybe, was it really worth it? It probably was, and a lot of times they fund that. Questions are funded on the census by federal departments, but
Mhm.
it's great when other researchers can make use of that. That
And
And the
everyone's
point,
using data to make decisions.
sure, go ahead, Irene.
I was just going to say, the point is, it's a resource allocation question, right? Like, how do we put our money as taxpayers? We give it to the government. How does the government allocate that? Like, what programs? So this is fabulous to see we've
Yeah,
got the data to make the decisions. Yeah.
exactly. And they'll use the data to evaluate as well programs and how successful
Mhm.
they were.
So I guess a follow-up question, Paul, when I think of, so I've in the past in my own research have filed Freedom of Information Act requests, and certain government agencies actually list all of the accepted requests. So does StatsCan do that, so I can kind of see what other academics or what other
Yeah,
maybe public
yeah.
sector employers are
I
asking for, and then infer something from why they'd be asking that question? Because I think that'd be fascinating.
yeah, and I found that by happenstance the other day. I think it's on About StatCan, but I
Great.
found that the other day, that site. It's really fascinating. It's a really fascinating glimpse of, yeah, about what people have filed those freedom of information requests. Yeah, that's we do publish that. I think it's a require. I think I think all federal departments are required to publish those.
Fantastic. Okay.
All
I
right. Can
think
you see
that's it.
my?
Yeah, we can see it. So we'll turn it back over, Paul, to you.
Okay, actually, I'm not where I want to be. There, you could see the perfect. All right, so I'm gonna have to. I'm sitting in a strange room, and I have to take my glasses off to see this monitor because it's a few feet away. Perfect. And then I can't read my notes. That's all right. All right, so I'll figure this out. So I'm at statcan.gc.ca, and from here, there's a lot of different ways to access our data. And if you have a way that works for you today, that's great. Don't change anything based on what I say. I'm just going to show you how I use a website and how you could access some of the tools that I mentioned today in the presentation. So the first thing I'm going to do is, if you're just starting off on a specific research topic, I would suggest click on the word subjects in the blue bar, in the blue menu bar, and then select the topic. So today we're focused on housing. And so I'm going to select housing. And yeah, so this is all things housing. And then you could look at things like dwelling characteristics, housing prices, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's some key indicators here. Um, And then there's some other links to things like the Canadian Housing Statistics Program that I mentioned, the Canadian Housing Survey. We have some hubs and dashboards. They're all located on this page. So, and the same is true on many of these other subjects as well. So if you're interested in health, same thing. You get a nice health page, and you could further refine your search. So that's a good place to start. Um, the next thing I want to show you on the main page, and I'm going back to the main page by simply clicking on the StatCan logo at the top left. Um, at the I mentioned before, at the bottom of every page, and I'm going to scroll down, apologize. There's a lot of good information on this page, but I want to show you first what's on the bottom. There's the contact StatCan. When you click on that, you got a toll-free number, you got an international, you could call our contact centers in Montreal. There's even, if you want to fax us a question, you could do that as well. You could even mail us a question. So all those options are here. Please do utilize. There used to be a live chat. I think it's temporarily on pause right now, but there was a live chat in the past as well. So great service, exceptional. So I wanted to show you that. The other thing I wanted to show you was the um, two things. First, yeah, I want to show you the survey page. You don't necessarily need to pay attention to how I got here. I'll show you different ways. Um, Actually, I'll show you the easy way. So say you wanted to get to the labor force survey page, and it really doesn't matter which survey it is, but I'm just using an example. You could click on the indicator on the right-hand side that says unemployment rate. And there's There's only 4 shown here, four key indicators. None are housing related, but that's okay for now. But when you click on unemployment rate, that'll bring you to the most recent release of what we call daily on the labor force survey, which is on February 9th, last week. From there, if you click on related information, it tells you that the source of this data is the labor force survey. So click on that. This is where you get all of the methodology of the survey. So the questionnaire, the description of the survey itself, the target population, etc. So that's all found on this survey page. The reason I use this survey page most often is on related products. When you click on related products, and unfortunately you have to do it 2 times, it tells you that I have 635 different products related to the labor force survey, and 338 of those are data tables. And you could filter by keyword. But what I like to do is you could also filter by level of geography that you're studying. So census subdivisions are municipalities. Not a big thing with labor force survey because of sample sizes, but definitely census metropolitan area. There's a lot of products on that. From the labor force survey. So that's one thing I wanted to show you. The other survey related page is this one up here, surveys and statistical programs. Specifically the first link, information for survey participants. If you've ever been asked to participate in a StatCan survey, or someone may even come to your door, normally we send a letter first, but maybe you missed the letter. If you ever want to, or someone's phoning you or someone emailing you, you want to make sure that person's from Statistics Canada and not someone impersonating StatCan or something like that. So if you or anybody that you know ever is asked to participate, I would urge you to click on this information for survey participants, and you could find the phone number. Just give us a call and we'll help you confirm that this is indeed a legitimate StatCan request. And use this method. Don't necessarily use something that they give you, of course. But yeah, so I wanted to show you that. But the big thing I wanted to show you today, though, was, of course, we're focusing on census population. So front and center of the blue bar at the top, census, and then census of population. At the same time, by the way, as the census of population, we also did the census of agriculture. For those of you interested, 2021 census of ag data is also available from this blue bar. But yeah, so from this page, I wanted to show you a few things. The reference material. So we looked at a lot of definitions today, and I, read through a couple of them really quickly, but you can see any and a lot more of these definitions and other information related to these under census reference. This is a great tool, and it's our most requested, so it's always going to be here, the dictionary, census of population. And I always click on the A to Z. And for example, we talked about tenure, and you could find tenure there. There's a definition, what statistical unit is being measured. It's a household. When was it reported, the different years. And then also what's cool about this is I just discovered this recently because I don't always scroll down to the bottom on these pages, but all the data products related to this definition are, you can see there's 23 data tables and products related to that. So these reference materials are fantastic. The other reference material that I would highly recommend, I'm going back to the main census page, census reference. And the other one is the guide to the census is really good. And there's actually a guide for all of these specific all the major topics, things like income. You'll find income reference guide, the minority official language reference guide, and there's going to be a housing reference guide here somewhere as well. Right here, housing characteristics reference guide. So that's all under reference material. How are we doing on time? I'm looking at the clock here. I know we're approaching 1 o'clock. Is it okay if I go over a little bit?
Yeah, sure. That's
Okay.
fine.
Okay, thank you. Because I want to get to the data. So I'm going to go back to the census main page, and I'm going to click on census topics. So the topic we're studying today is housing. So click on housing and I could filter by all products. So I could see there's 17 products related um, to housing, or I could just click on data products. And the first thing that comes up are the data tables. So it doesn't mean there's only 10 data products, but there's actually, when you click on data tables for housing, you'll see that there are 38 tables. And so I want to spend a couple minutes showing you some of these, how these data tables work, if you don't mind. So I'm just going to click on the first one. They all work pretty much the same way. Um, you'll want to like use the drop downs. That'll be your first instinct, is use the drop downs. I never use the drop downs. There's a much better way to do that, and it's using this add remove data button, because you could use a drop, but say you want to look at two different geographies. I think it's hold down the shift or the control, but there's a much easier way of doing that. Click on the add remove data button, and you could see here, you could quickly filter. Um, so for example, there's 166 different geographies. Canada's selected by default in most tables, but say that you don't want Canada, but instead you want Timmins. So, and this is looking at, we didn't have time to talk about geographies, but this is looking at census agglomerations. So this is not always equal to a city. In this case it is, but it's not always the case. It's kind of like a smaller version of a census metropolitan area is the simplest way to explain what a census agglomeration is. So I could select Timmins, but maybe I also want to select Ontario, and I want to say Toronto as well. Okay, so then you could make other selections. I haven't hit apply yet because I could do that at the end. Um, what do I want to look? What age of, this is looking at the total age of primary household maintainers, or you could just look at household maintainers who are within these age groups. So I always like to, in all of my data tables, I always like to include the total. In this case here, I want to look at persons age 65 to 74, 75 to 84, and then 85 and over, and so on. And so you could move on to the other categories. I'm not trying to explain really any of what the results are. I just basically showing you how these data table works and some tips and tricks. So I'm not going to spend too much time with the other indicators. The one item that you should know is you could also customize what shows up in columns and rows. So I'm okay for now on the default. And then once you make all your selections, hit apply. And then you see you get my results. You get Ontario first, and I'm sure there's a much better way to organize this table, but that's how I did it. So from here, a couple of things, pro tips. You could download this table. So there's a download button here. You could download it in all different formats, mostly CSV. You could also get access to developer options like APIs with this developer button. So you could do that, which is fine. Then you could bring it into your own data analytics software and do your own work there. But say that you just want to share this table with a colleague, and or save it even for yourself for later use. Instead of downloading the table and it disappearing, or if you're like me, it ends up who knows where on your computer, you can actually let us save it for you. It save my customization, and you copy, so a unique URL gets created for you. And then you could take that link, paste it in the email, send it to a colleague. You could put it in this chat in a Teams or a Zoom meeting, and that's great. So that's a great way to do that. The other way to access data tables, go to Census Population, and right up here under Census Data, of course. This is where you access things like the census profile. We'll access that. So here is really cool. You could type in a postal code. And when I type in that post, we don't publish data by postal code. What we use the postal code for is to link it to our census geographies. So a census geography could be a province, could be the city, the CMA, the census division, the federal electoral district, the census tract, et cetera, et cetera. We do have, it's not here, I don't see, sometimes we have forward sortation areas, which is the first 3 digits of the postal code. But I just want to show you the census dissemination area. just to show you how small these are. So you can see in this dissemination area, there's 422 people as of 2021, and you could get access to a map of this DA by clicking on the little I next to the dissemination areas. Don't have names, they have codes, numbers, so that you could find there. And again, add remove data button is your friend, your fun friend. You can access and only get the information that you need. So you should deselect, and I only want housing data. So let's get all the housing data for this DA, and there you have it. And again, this one's a little bit different. You don't have your save customization, but you have a download button where you could download this data as displayed, or a comprehensive, so you could download all DAs in a given geography if you wanted to. Just a couple other things, and I won't keep you too much longer. Back to the census main page, clicking on, the census data, and I want to look at data tables. And you could select data tables by topic, but you could also browse by variable. So we learned a lot about some of the variables today. So if you know the name of the variable, like I'm going to pick on tenure again, you could see here all the tables that have tenure, and the little 3 provides you, or the number provides you with the level of detail. So you expand, you hit the plus, you could see tenure 3 is a total, owner, renter. Tenure 4 means owner, renter, and dwelling provided by local governments, such as a First Nation or Indian band. And then once you're satisfied that that's what you're looking for, you click on the title, and a pop-up occurs, and you get all the tables that have that variable in it. And then you just click on that, and then the table is the same as the one I showed you before. And the last thing I want to show you is answer your question about the number of households in Canada. And I think I'll use the census profile, and you could get that for the whole country. So just type in Canada, search Canada. And so there were a total of 36,901,000. There were 16,000 plus private dwellings, but I think the question was on households, so I will deselect that, select all the housing characteristics, and I believe it is. So there's almost 15 million private households in Canada as of May of 2021. There's a few other resources, but I'll provide the links to those. And a lot of our products do have tutorials in them as well. So the Census Program Data Viewer that I hinted upon earlier is kind of it's not always the most intuitive program, but there is a tutorial available for that. So I'll stop there and see if there's if there are any other questions.
That's fabulous, Paul. Thank you so much. This is incredible. It's such a rich amount of data. When you download the tables, you were talking about that, what level of granularity is the data? Like, obviously I'm thinking about the privacy piece. So is it just go down to chunks or?
Yeah, so you could see, I think you could still see my screen here. So this is a good example. You notice that everything ends in 5 or 0. So everything's randomly rounded to a 5 or a 0. Certain indicators, like most of the income data, require a threshold. So I believe it's 250 persons before we'll publish income data for any specific geography. So there's things like that will absolutely, that is at our core of what we do, is to make sure that people's individual data cannot be, I'll use the term reverse engineer, to get to someone's household or our other surveys or businesses or things like that. So absolutely, there's a few products out there. There's that may be of interest to some. They're called open databases that we publish, but those are all using publicly available sources. So we will provide a little more detail than we would in any of our, but they're not results from any of our surveys. It's just, like I said, publicly available sources. But yeah, so the DA that, like, we were looking at a DA profile table, a dissemination area, and that's a, that's a very small neighborhood of 500 people. That's like, in some cases in Toronto, that's could be, one city block or less, right? Like that's a
Mhm,
very small level, but absolutely people's privacy is at the core of what we do.
mhm. Thank you. I'm just conscious of time. I can see people are, we've lost a couple, but any questions from the room or anybody that's logged on? Or Michael, did you have any questions?
It's not really a question. It's more just a comment, Paul. I think so. One again, thank you so much for the presentation. I think I teach managerial accounting, and a lot of times students struggle with assumption validity. And I think a lot of the data from StatsCan can be used to validate a lot of different assumptions. And one tool that everybody on this call might want to look to as well is I know StatsCan has a lot of economic multipliers, right? So you can actually see what StatsCan thinks would be the economic impact of a particular industry or exogenous change in demand. So all of these tools can really be used for a lot of, I guess, empirical support for any decision. So don't underestimate just how many great tools there are with StatsCan, I guess is my point. So thank you, Paul. I really appreciate this and walking us through, because it can seem insurmountable with this amount of data.
Yeah, absolutely. And to, like, with your point on the multipliers and some of our economic data, I didn't mention much about the agency, but yeah, absolutely, we are the source of data, such as GDP, unemployment rate, CPI. So absolutely, it's we play a key role for policy making, both in government and within private sector, and all spaces in between. So absolutely, and definitely, I think there's if you guys would like, the door's always open for future sessions on some of those economic topics, if that's something that you'd be interested by. I could certainly get one of my colleagues involved. I'm definitely not an expert in those fields. I have a lot of experience in census, because it is such a huge part of what we do. But we have very specific experts in all these areas, and that would be better suited for that type of discussion. Absolutely.
For sure. And I think it would be great to have a little workshop or something to help, say, our students, become more familiar with this rich database and how to mine it and get the information that they might want out of it that they can use. Because I mean, this is a lot, and I'd imagine just to fully utilize it, you need to work with it a little bit. I mean, you're very
Yeah.
familiar with it, but yeah.
Yeah, I used to do a full day workshop on census data alone,
Wow.
like in
Okay.
person, and we recently transitioned that to a 2-day online version of the presentation. We haven't done it in a while, but perhaps in the future we would offer that again. But yeah, definitely. I've just touched the surface today on what's possible from
Yeah.
census, let alone all of the other 450 odd other programs that are just as useful for specific people and organizations.
Well, that's great. I don't see any more questions. So I'm just going to say once again, thank you, Paul, for being with us today. This has been incredible. I think it's just the tip of the iceberg here. You've just sort of shared with us, and I think many of us are hungry for more. So we may indeed invite you back or one of your colleagues to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Keep in
yeah.
touch. Would love to reach out. And as I mentioned, I am in Toronto, so if you want to do something in person in the future as well, we could definitely organize something like that as well.
Okay, that's great. So with that, I just want to say thanks again to Paul, and thanks to all of you for joining us. And we hope to see you at our future seminars. And just a reminder again,